Hey guys, I kind of messed up the audio on the video before, so this is like a take two. We're going to get into watching what's going on here. Um, Basically, what happened at work was that we had a product shot that needed to be done. I didn't have any photographs available, and it's not okay to just go grab something off Google Images and try to do that, because first things first, you're not going to get what you want. Second thing, uh, you're not going to get the resolution you want, no matter what. You're not going to get the kind of stuff you need for print. And so I started looking at what my probabilities were for actually doing something with doing something in Blender. So first things first, I had to change the cycles renderer, and because we had to take advantage of what we could do with HDRI. So there's this really cool website called HDRI Haven. Let me say it again, HDRI Haven. You can use the images that you get with HDRIs as a lighting source in your environment. And if you jump on the Patreon like I did, you can get access to a Google Drive full of the images. So here I'm just showing you that I downloaded the studio version that just came out today, a single image there, and then actually downloaded a couple to try. And I think that's the one that I mainly used there. And I have to admit that at work, I didn't have time to mess around with trying to model from scratch. So what we need to do sometimes is to take shortcuts. And so I got rid of the cube and I went to make human. There's a couple other options out there. You can get manual Bastoni Lab, but this was just something really fast, and I'm showing you what I did at work because that's what was on my computer. And the main thing is to set up for export. And here I'd actually started to export, but I didn't have the right format. So the key is to select your format that you're going to export to, which is, for me, was OBJ. So I need to change to that and then set up the export. And just saving it to the desktop. The name didn't really matter. It just needed to be something I could find to make sure I was okay. At work, I've got serious mess of stuff on my desktop, so sometimes I have to make a folder and just pile everything in. And I did that here today to clear up my desktop. Here we're going to actually import that mesh object. Just the object. We're not worried about trying to match up the materials. And it doesn't matter about the settings. We're just going to bring it in. And then it's way more than what I need. And of course it's just generic, so there's nothing really there that I need. I looked at both sides and decided I wanted to work with the left hand. So while it's still active, I click it to select it, go into edit mode, and then I need to take off the limit visible to selected, so that way you can see through the front. And then we need to use B for box select to select everything up to a certain point and delete the verts. Then I go into object mode and delete the eyes because they're bugging me out. They're looking at me. Okay, here's where it's kind of silly, but what I needed to do was to take that and actually go to the toolbar and tell the origin to fit to the mesh, and then to snap the selected object to the cursor, get it in the center of the viewport. And here's where I need to clean it up. That extra stuff on the end is not necessary. So I just select a edge loop with vertex loop with Alt key, and then L over the other piece that's disconnected, select it and delete it. And then now we need to rotate things. Sometimes the main thing for me is just to get it where it's lined up to the horizon. sort of as straight, so I can at least try to put a bone and have it kind of line up. Which, you know, the edge loops are still going to be kind of organically round and kind of awkward, but the placement needs to be as straight as possible. Here I try to go about rotating, and I've decided to set it by cursor. I think, yeah. And I got to go to the side view, because once you do, then you find that you're not quite where you wanted it to be. So I'll move it in Y, get the cursor, and or at least the pivot there in the center, and then I rotate on the cursor, and then I decide, nope, I'm going to go horizontal, and I try to get it as straight as possible to go follow that one edge loop that goes through the middle finger, and that kind of looks okay. And at first I wanted to make a video where I showed making the glove and the hand inside the glove, and then realized that's probably not going to work. I go through the process of trying to duplicate part of the arm here, and I was just deselecting up to a certain point, and I'd make a duplicate, separate it by selection, then reselect it in object mode, get rid of the material so I can tell what's going on. And then the key is to use Alt S in edit mode to kind of inflate it a little bit on the normal. That way it's actually kind of like a glove. And also it needs to look less like a hand that was just colored. Once we get into sculpt mode, we need to go back and actually smooth out where the fingernails are, or at least a little bit. Here I'm trying to put a single bone in place. And at first I think I'm going to work with it just from the palm, and then I realized, no, I need to make sure I've got the arm. So I scale it down, and then I decide I'm going to move it back. So move it back on Y. We would go to edit mode though. Okay, here we'll go into edit mode and start working on extruding. Now there was a small mistake, is that I've got the tip of that bone right in the middle of the forearm instead of out there closer to the wrist. So that's something I'll have to correct later. If you want to, you just make it more like a regular where your bones would be placed. Make that middle one where the wrist is very small. This is the point where on the top view I try to make sure I've got the angles correct. I turn on the shift clicking the widget control allows me to add in the not only grab but rotate at the same time. This is probably the most boring video I've actually done, but it's kind of necessary. I mean, I didn't want to speed it up and have it going by too quickly. Interesting enough, the relationships between the bones happens in edit mode. So when I make a new bone, I'm selecting the tip of the bone and then snapping the cursor to it, and then I'm just hitting Shift A to add a new bone, and it's not in the position I wanted it to be in, but it's the root is at the right spot. Then I'm extruding out to get to the right number of joints, but from that side view it's not easy to get it where it needs to go. And in the process of here, I try to put snapping on and get it to snap to the surface, and it kind of snapped to the bottom surface. So there's an error there. Here, it ends up being that you just have to rotate on a pivot. So I turn around and put the cursor at the knuckle and then rotate them all. See, it just grabbed and fell. I try to do them individually and they get really jacked up, and that's not going to work. So that's why we have undo. So select all three with snapping off, of course. Video is probably longer because I was trying to figure out what I was doing while I was doing it. Okay. Like I said, if you've got the cursor as your pivot, you're able to do a little bit more, because you can place your cursor on the fly from that angle. And it works. You just kind of have to move it around a little bit once you get in the other view to make sure that you're covering where all the joints actually are. And once you've got that working and pretty close to right, it's easier to start making the other ones because you can just duplicate those three and then move them. And I think I was trying to talk about parenting. Yeah, need to make sure that that parent was correct, because I want that parent back to that palm bone to be active. So this way, making the duplicate of all three each time, that parental relationship line is there, and that means I know when I move that palm, it's going to move all four fingers. Which of course is this kind of stuff is kind of boring, because this isn't really the greatest rigging at all, and in no way do I think I'm a rigger. But the whole point, the pain of what I'm going through here, is so that I can actually better sculpt and then illustrate based on that sculpture. So I haven't found a way to move things like this with just sculpt, and I've had to do things like this. And this one's easier because we're going to use a multi-res modifier on the mesh, so we can get an extreme amount of detail going for, you know, some folds and some, you know, creases and such. But say like when we're working with dynamic topology, Dyntopo, when we're working with that, what I end up doing is similar to this. Is what I'll make is, at this point, I'll have the rig set up to manipulate this mesh, and then this mesh will actually be deformed by the armature, and then this mesh would then deform the dynamic topology version. So I would have it to where I use this one as a mesh deform modifier. I mean, mesh deform modifier goes on the Dyntopo and then names this one as the deform mesh former. So that way, if I'm working out stuff that's pretty basic, but I still want to be able to pose it and move it around and then sculpt it, the mesh deform is easier to work with. But then the bones allow you to manipulate that mesh deform a lot easier. So I'm really hoping that when we get the Dr. Sergey the brand new depths graph, you know, dependency graphs, when everything's, you know, pretty much done. I mean, I know it's never done, but if that happens and we end up with better relationships and better controls and better constraints and such, then it would be great to be able to just, you know, toggle on and off the relationship between the dynamic topology and the basic, and be able to do these kind of things where we'd be able to rig it out and then just keep adding to the rig as we keep doing more, and then just bind it again. And maybe, you know, the idea is that the reason I'm saying that, the reason I do that with the dynamic topology is because, like, if I was just doing that here, the automatic weights that we do when we basically bind or parent the mesh to the armature, the problem with that is the automatic weights are only good for that particular set of vertices and the position. And once you change the mesh, you can't get them to work anymore. Then you have to go back in and try to see if you can paint them, and it's difficult to try to weight paint something with so many details. So you have the mesh deform. But the cool thing would be to be able to, like, modify the mesh deform part as well pretty quickly. Then maybe then you can sculpt in on the dynamic topology and then just rebind it, and then you can be able to pose it, continue to pose it through, and make things work. At least that's the idea. Here we finally get into the point where we're parenting the mesh to the bones, and now we're going to try test it out and see if it turns. Of course, I can't seem to keep my hands going the right way because I keep selecting things wrong. And success, we actually got deformation based on our bone rotation. Okay, now we are finally to the point where we can do something better than just rigging. We're going to add a multi-resolution modifier to this thing that we're going to make into a glove. We need to turn on preserve volume, because that way we don't get a lot of flat spots. Or at least ideally that's the way it's supposed to work. We still have to subdivide. I get to 4 here, but this computer has actually got a lot of problems. It's very, very old. It's like 12 years old. Actually, maybe more. Anyway, we're going to get a better computer eventually, and if we do, then I'll probably be able to make better sculpts. Maybe I can turn around and try to keep up with some of the big guys. Aha. But here we've changed it to the armature to bone. I mean, just sticks, so we can see what we're doing. And I keep jumping back and forth, accidentally selecting the wrong thing. So I've got to try to build up some of the material, because I already know that all I did there was clean up my workspace. Press the N key to get rid of the N panel, and I pressed F5 over the top of the toolbar in order to move it to the right. People keep asking me about that for some reason. It's not something that comes up. I mean, you wouldn't want that little tidbit of pop up every time you hover over the toolbar telling you that you can flip it. So I can understand why it's kind of hidden. Turn off this symmetry there, because you don't want to affect both sides of the mesh. And here I'm just adding to the mass of the palm there where the thumb comes in. And the reason being is that there's, make human mesh with no modifications, and kind of wanted to show you kind of the general areas where I kind of fix things up to make it look closer to what I had reference photos about. And this is where I come up to the tips, which is kind of boring, but you kind of add clay to the tips to round them out a little bit, and then hit it with a smooth. And the same way I do it with just about every sculpt. I got 3 positions with the working with the tablet. You press with the tablet, and that's kind of like a left mouse action, and that gets the effect of the brush. And then control reverses it. So if it's raising, then you can lower it, or you can make it sharp instead of smooth. And then the actual smoothing is by pressing shift while you're doing your mouse or your pen. And that allows you, once you've added the extra detail, then you can hit that smooth that kind of gets rid of some of those really pronounced details. So what I end up doing is deciding, okay, I need to pose this first. So this gets to be the painful part because I forgot to just turn the preview of the multi-resolution modifier down. You know, that's kind of like a note to self thing. Hey, if your computer is hanging up because you're using this high-res multi-resolution, turn it down. Or even go to the panel and press on the I on the modifier so that you don't see the modifier in action and you can go about doing your pose. Then when you're done posing, then click it back on. And then that way you're not struggling like this guy Craig here, who is really struggling trying to use the widget to pose the fingers there. We're talking just about a couple of bones, man. But the problem is the computer can't keep up with all the detail at the same time in the viewport while recording it. See, it started to mess up on the widget, so I had to turn off the translate. And I was trying to be very careful not to accidentally do anything, you know, profane with this, because for the most part, I think there's a lot of younger people that see this, and it wouldn't be good if they turned around and saw somebody do something on the internet and had their mom looking over their shoulder. Oh, look at that! Oh my gosh, turn it off. No good. And that's where I tried, you know, selecting all 4 bones and using them at the same time. And then same thing. I selected all 4 tip bones. Tried rotating on that same common axis. In a pinch that works okay, but now at this point I see that the pose is kind of awkward because the bones are not lining up where the fingers should be. They're not compressed in, you know, and you naturally would kind of pull your hand in. So we struggle for a little while here trying to get the fingers to where they look more natural. And then every time I select the area next to a bone instead of the bone, then all of a sudden the mesh sculpt is selected. You know, it's an idea for a feature. I didn't think about it till just now. What would be really cool is to have a different kind of local isolation view, to where you can put what you have selected as local, like you do with a slash key, but with a modifier, to where when you do that, you see everything a little lighter around it, but you can only at that point select that thing that's in local mode. Kind of like working with Illustrator, where when you're working with vectors in Illustrator, if you say double click something for selection, it'll go into a local view, and then everything else is like grayed out, sort of. You can't select anything while you're working on that individual, and then when you're done, you double click outside and you go back into regular mode. Here I start using the crease brush, trying to get an effect, and I'm not really certain about my setting, about whether I've got it strong enough or not. And it kind of pulls in, and I'm starting to get something, but I realize that I've got to start turning it up. And here's that 3-part process I'm talking about. And this is something I do all the time with all kinds of strokes. So it's not just because of the crease brush, it's not just because of whatever, but when you're using the brush, sometimes it helps to do like a stroke that's, you know, like with a crease brush, run a crease and then run a control crease so that it gives a raised area, and then press shift and kind of smooth the taper off, so you can kind of create a nice smooth fall off, so it doesn't just end, but kind of like disappears into the, you know, it flattens out into the surface. You'll see it right here, a little bit there, and it gets kind of strong. And then I'll go back and I'll kind of rub it with a shift and kind of smooth it. Well, I will eventually. Especially if I decide that, yeah, like that. Like I decided that was a little too strong. And it's not that it's boring, it's just there's not a lot to talk about this. What I basically got to do is go around the object. I got to try to put um, creases, but I've also got to, they're not really creases, I got to bring raised areas where the plastic itself is kind of pulling up off the skin or being pulled across the skin, so that it feels like you've actually got a glove on instead of just being, you know, a skin. Because it's not. If you put on latex or nitrile gloves, you're going to find that you have a lot of little places where the plastic is pulled across an open area, or it might crumple or gather in something, depending on what size you got. If they're tight, form fitting, that's one kind of way. And then sometimes there's, believe it or not, there's a lot of gloves that don't fit very well, so you'll have a lot of baggy areas, and you got to kind of work that out. I already know at this point that I'm not going to be able to get the full sculpt done like what I did at work, but I'm kind of showing you generally what the areas were that I had to attack to make sure that everything looked okay. And the nice thing about multi-res sculpting is that, well, one of them is that you can still pose this differently, come back and continue to sculpt. And the other thing is that this mesh can still be UV mapped. So if I wanted to actually paint it versus using a procedural material, then that would be possible. However, in this one, since I'm trying to make like a black nitrile glove, I just end up using the principled shader and mess around with adding some subsurface scattering just to get a little bit of variation in the surface. I think for the most part at work, it was kind of more of an accident when I've realized that I could just continue to pose back. So what happens is I've got this pose, I've already keyframed at like frame 1. And there's an option, pose control. You can select all the bones and they clear all transformations. So that became very, very cool because I was able to go like 11, 10 frames away, 11 frames away, and then, clear the transforms and then keyframe that. So then you have the ability to kind of find a happy medium between, and it also serves to help you sculpt inside the hand. So we're going to get to that in a little while. One thing I wish I had done was to address the actual lip of the glove there, because here I am putting more detail there, but really should have worked on maybe extruding that around and giving it a little bit of a roll to it, which I'll probably still do that for myself, but I kind of wanted to show that it was possible. So here I go back into not non-render view. I can see the bones, and then that's when I'm realizing, okay, and it's almost good enough. We can open it up to try to get some more detail inside. This is where I open up, get the timeline set up, select the bones. I think this is where we put the keyframe, location, rotation, scale. Then you go to we set the range. I think we put it for frame 11 or something. That way it was a little bit past it. And here's where we go to the pose and clear the transforms all. Okay, and we can also set a keyframe there. Then we can then set the maximum range just for a little bit past it. You can go back first frame and then play through. And it's kind of slow because I've got that multi-resolution modifier on there, so I was worried it was going to be too fast, but it actually kind of worked out. And then I paused it about 3/4 of the way and went back to sculpt mode on my object so it can show you here it can work on the inside. And it's not perfect. Any sculpting you do here in this position, if you're trying to get a render from this side, maybe that would be the reason you do that, but it's not exactly the same as when you pose it that way. So one of the things I'd like to learn how to do is to do the I guess, like, well, they've talked about having vector maps or vector displacement. I'd like to be able to work out a way to switch between different vector displacement maps, like maybe have 2 of them and then keyframe between them on a driver or something, so that way when you know that when you pose the bone this way, you know it's all the way open, so it's going to use this map, and then in between it kind of blends and then goes to this other map for when it's closed, that kind of thing. That would be awesome. When it's kind of out of the scope of where I'm at knowledge wise, but I've read about stuff, but I don't know it yet. Pretty happy with the way it is. Cleaning it up a little bit, and then I realized I'm going to need to save the file because that's what happened last time when I tried to do this. Started making one and then boom, broke it. So there you go, it's saved. I know there's more that I want to do with it, but at this point now I need to add a camera. So normally what I do is just add a camera, object mode, and then I use Control-Alt-0 on the number pad so I can get it in view. Realize, nope, shot, so get outside of it so I can see it. And just grab it and move it back to the view with 0. I turn on lock camera to view. Starts moving around, and it's kind of jumpy because I've got the camera selected. So if I'd select my mesh object, that makes it easier to focus on that, because in my normal workflow I have the editing setups and user preferences to rotate around selected. I like it like that. And then I'm just double checking to show the camera is actually now unlocked, but technically it's locked because the position is not changing. So kind of misnomer, but the glove is in the view. Go to expand our view up there. We know we don't need the timeline anymore because we've already set the poses and we're already at the frame we want. I'm just going to see about making the materials and the environment. So here's where we get the HDRI involved. We need to make a new world, and we're going to add an image texture. Uses for the environment. Use an environment texture, and before we add that, we're going to try to get an RGB mix node, which I think I mess up and put an RGB curve node and delete it. Plug that into the color input of our shader for the environment. We plug the environment texture into the top socket, and now we need to add light path node. And then we're going to take the camera path, the mix factor. This is something that Derek taught me, and I've been using it ever since. First I set it for black, and then I realized I'm making a black glove in a black environment. That's not going to work. Gray. In my downloads, I've got a couple of HDRIs. It takes a second for them to pop up, and then I choose the one on the far right. I think mainly because it's still black and gray environment with white light. Okay, and then once that's all set up, decide I want to use the same thing and bring in this one that's all really yellow. See what happens. These are, like I said, from HDRI Haven, free to get, so please get in there and get some, try them out. If you like them that much, get on that Patreon, you know. They can use some money to turn around and buy some coffee while they're go out there making more fries. Checking on what I'm doing. Border and crop has to be on if I want to save my computer from dying, because I don't want to render outside of that frame of the camera. Now we're going to set up a material. Here's where I pretty much cheat. Since we've got such great assets now, shader, I'm just going to add a principled shader. So it pretty much has a whole bunch of stuff built into one. I'm going to pretty much use it just for specularity and for a little bit of subsurf and color. Main surface color, I'm going to just pretty much black. I think it kind of give it a blue cast to the subsurf. Just a little bit. Try to keep it minimal. Specularity, kind of bump it up a little bit. Roughness to the specularity needs to drop a little bit, but not too much. But that, and later I'll show you that there's just a couple of different kinds of material. So realize that as far as the crop. So got that. It's all good. Shift Z to go to the rendered view, and it's coming out quite blue. So I know I need to turn that subsurf down some. So it's all black. Got too much blue. Bring it down some more. I think I take it down to 0. Look up, and I'm like, well, that's awesome. But then it's too, doesn't have any of that extra coming through. So type in something crazy and it comes up 0002 or something. But it still just got just a little bit of that blue in there. That's where I wanted it. Got that. Realize, well, the preview is too low. You need to bump it back to 4. And then it's got to kind of recalculate it. And I kind of moved around, figuring, okay, it's not gonna die, it's not gonna kill me this time. So let's go ahead and use. I like what's showing in the detail, even though it's not fully sculpted. Still looks pretty good, and it's got some weight to it, even a little bit. Now, don't like that HDRI just really over blew. I mean, I could probably use it, but I'd have to turn around and actually change a lot of materials, the material properties, to get to where it stayed black. So I ended up deciding, no, it's going to leave. And then I unhide the hand that I'd hidden before. I decide, well, you know, I could still make this work. Not bound to the armature, so it's not going to work right since it's not posed in. I didn't want to take time with that. Plus, since it's a black natural glove, it's not going to show skin through, so there's no point in doing that. Was the idea, that's what I was going to do, but I ended up deciding, let's go ahead and just make a mask modifier to sculpt that hand portion of the arm so I can keep the sticking out. And it's pretty much just go to edit mode, start from the outside, select the verts on the arm there, shift plus key, got it to there, then we go and make a vert group. Go to the properties and we make a vertex group. And on type there, which I type it twice. Sign. Go to the modifier tab, go to object, go to modifier tab, modify. With the mask modifier selected, we turn around, choose that group, and it masks everything but that group. So we're good. Now subsurf, levels, made it smooth. Figuring, okay, that'll be all right. Now let's go back to the view, and we go to render. and it picks up everything, and then like, what's going on, man? That's whiter than white. And what it is I didn't finish making the shader for that object, and I'm looking inside and I find just this giant mass of junk for the skin, and I have no idea what's going on, and I decided, no, I'm not gonna mess with it. Just left it. As far as that goes, that's pretty much it. There's nothing else going on there. Now on the glove, you can turn up the specularity, and you know, turn down the roughness of the specularity so that it gives you more of a plasticky feel, depending on what you want. But for the most part, this is the process through. I'm sorry about the audio getting jacked up on the first iteration. Hopefully this one is better. And this is the first time I've used OBS to actually do an overdub while watching my own video. And experiment there with just changing the color of the nitrile glove and the roughness. I think I turned it down. Yeah, it almost gives it a wet look. Pretty crazy. And I'm kind of wondering if I UV mapped it, I bet you I could paint basically like moisture happening and then render it that way. Be interesting. Okay, well, anyway, I think this is about it. I'm going to stop now because it's just repetitive stuff, and no, you don't see all the rest of that. But hopefully this has helped out, and any comments, questions, leave them behind, and I'll do what I can to help out, I guess. Have fun, and I hope it maybe inspires you to do some stuff with some sculpting and some rigging at the same time. Talk to you guys later.